business cycles. Yeah. The business cycles.
I believe as women, we owe it to ourselves to explore how external influences, along with potentially our personal proclivities, might set ourselves up to betray our best interests. So, in the spirit of be the change, I want to say something which might potentially raise some eyebrows or even upset some folks. Here we go, Katie. Now here's where we upset some folks.
Let's do it.
Here we go. In my professional experience over 3 decades now, women have been both the best bosses and the absolute worst. This is not to say I haven't had poor male bosses. I have. I've had my share of neglectful, disengaged, and uninspiring male leaders. But holding the prize for the most horrific, waking up in the middle of the night or going to work with a stomachache type bosses, well, those were all women. In my experience, and no doubt fueled by the complexities we've already covered, women can be extremely insecure and can often act irrationally and cruelly, especially when feeling threatened. Other women can often be the target. Some years ago, me and another woman with a similar professional profile were hired by a global firm. They were looking to fill 3 similar roles, though one would be a first among equals, manager to the other 2. The company boasted an extremely positive culture, one of those best places to work type places, and had a group leader who was both nice and approachable. Ultimately, me and the other external hire ended up reporting to a third colleague who was already working in the firm. I would find out later that due to her interpersonal style and complaints from clients and internal colleagues, she was forced out of her role and moved to our area. This new boss, whom I'll call Tina, met with me on my first day to outline her expectations along with the department's near and long-term objectives. I had held a similar role to hers at my last company, which she knew, having been on my interview panel. At the end of the 2-hour meeting, I suggested I set up meet and greets with all of the senior leaders of the various groups, which is a pretty normal, commonplace activity for new hires. And she said, "Oh yeah, you should meet everyone. I'll send you a list of names. I just ask that you include me in the calls." And I kind of paused. I'd never had a leader who wanted to participate, particularly in introductory meetings, because they're like pretty superficial and personal in nature, but I agreed to do it and set up the dozen or so calls with her. Now, during this time in my life, I was in the process of moving. And while my home office was in one city, I was in a global team and not co-located with anyone, so I was able to work anywhere I wanted. So in the first 3 days of working in this new company, I worked out of one of our European offices. On the 3rd day of my new job, I ran into one of the senior directors of our group in the cafe. We chatted a bit while we drank our coffee, and he offered to walk me back to my desk. He said goodbye, and then that was it. I flew back to my home city that night, and on Friday, I had my first weekly check-in with Tina, my new boss. At the very end, and I remember this well, it was 4:55 on Friday because I think I was going out to a happy hour with some friends to celebrate my first week at the new job. And I was like eager to leave. And I was looking at the time, and that's when Tina said, "So, Mary, I had a call with Marco this morning, and he mentioned the 2 of you chatted. Maybe I didn't make myself clear when I gave you the instruction that you were not to meet with any of the senior directors without me being present. So let me reiterate that to you now so you can understand it. You are not to interact with anyone unless I give you express permission to do so." All right, I'm not going to lie. I was shocked and a little freaked out. I'd never experienced something like this before. And I think I had just managed to explain to her that I just ran into this guy informally getting coffee, and it was like nothing more than chit chat. I even pointed out to her that we had a formal call in the calendar for the following week, and she was invited to that. And she kind of brushed it off and was like, "Okay, no. But if this should ever happen again, you should tell them that you can't speak or cut the conversation short and then call me to debrief on what was said.
Oh my God, that's terrifying.
So yeah, this type of controlling, vindictive, and insecure behavior unfortunately became worse with Tina over time. I learned that she acted this way with my female peers. Hey, Luke, over there. She also acted this way with my female peers and the female administrative team. I had a pretty strong emotional, and Katie, even a somatic reaction to her harassment and bullying. And it escalated to the point where I had to discuss it with leadership. And it just so happened that others in our group did the same. And after a few months, she was removed from her position. Unfortunately, they just reassigned her again somewhere else in the organization, moving the problem.
Of course.
And so, Tina, obviously insecure and had pretty limited insight into her inner motivations and how others perceived her, even after being reassigned previously. And if she had read me correctly, she would still see me as a formidable player, but one who actually enjoys being needed and valued more than anything else. I mean, sure, I could have done her job, but I wasn't offered it, and I was enjoying digging into mine. If she had cultivated our relationship, not only would I have achieved everything she wanted me to do with my department, but she would have had a powerhouse ally who would have gone out of her way to support her in her success. I'm a high tides raises all boats kind of person, but Tina was not, and she read the situation wrong, missing a golden opportunity, and instead allowed unaddressed emotional issues drive her behaviors in ways which ultimately got her fired. Worth noting is how the organization dealt with her by passing the problem on to another group in hopes it would go away, instead of providing Tina honest feedback, coaching, and a performance plan to give her a chance to grow beyond these limitations. We've said it before on the show. People don't like talking about or addressing these kinds of issues, even when it's in everyone's best interest to do so. Having a conversation with someone like Tina isn't going to be easy, but it's the right thing to do, especially if the person is clearly not able to resolve the issues independently. Well, so that was that was a bummer of a story. So I want to quickly add a shout out to two amazing women leaders to end on a nicer note. The first, Vivian Newton, was my first boss at NYU, where I began my work career. Vivian was intellectually and emotionally smart, brought out the best in me, and taught me grace through her example. The second, more recent example is someone whose emotional intelligence matches her intellect, who manages complexity and interpersonal challenges like a Jedi Knight, and who has the personality and character of someone you look forward to spending time with. She's a big fan of the show, and I don't want to embarrass her, so I'll just say you know who you are, and I'm looking forward to drinks and sidecars in September.
Hey, well, that sounds nice.
Gotta balance it out.
You had me on the edge of my seat, living every indignity alongside you.
Yuck.
Yeah, and
Cringy.
it's so relatable. Everything about this podcast being about what people won't talk about, that is just really, honestly, pretty universally understood. And since you opened the door, I want to also give a shout out to an inspirational boss and leader of mine, Kristen Thede. And here's what I learned from her. So when I worked for her, there's so many examples from her, by the way, but I'm going to give this one that was a first major impact, which was when I worked for her, there was a bonus for me that was on the table. The calculation of it had a little gray area, and I was twisting myself into knots to be fair about it. I wanted to sort of represent that I was like clear thinking and wasn't, that whole thing. And she called me out. She just laid it out. And she said, "You did an exceptional job. You asked for the whole thing. You earned it." And this changed my entire approach to everything, and even impacted how I support and mentor other people. She unapologetically puts herself and her family first in a way that really shines brightly in retrospect. She moves quickly in decision making. She doesn't second guess herself. And she continues to be a vocal and fervent cheerleader for me. She's such a boss. And one fun fact is she was an early Google employee and she received the Google Founders Award. She's part of the team that built AdWords. But the thing is, she would never tell you this. She's a strong and secure leader who inspires through her intelligence and charisma and her ability to meet you where you are and provide a ton of value, not through self-promotion of her past accomplishments.
And we'll be right back.
In previous episodes, I've shared heartbreaks of being betrayed or sabotaged by people I've worked with or for. Preparing for this episode had me recalling a notable instance when a female board member warned me about my female boss undermining me in board meetings. The board member expressed concern for my well-being, and it was pretty cloak and dagger. She'd asked me to meet her in Boston Public Garden near the Swan Boats, and we sat on a bench staring forward as she told me. But my boss, on the other hand, she claimed she wanted to shield me from the board's perceptions, advising me not to attend board meetings, telling me that she was protecting me. So that situation was part of a larger power struggle that actually had nothing to do with me. But the story that really surfaced in my mind when thinking on this topic and preparing for this episode took me back to college. I worked full-time through school, including a stint at Applebee's. And during a summer break, a regular customer who drove a bread truck asked if I'd cover his route while he was on vacation. And he offered me $600 cash per week, an irresistible sum. The job involved midnight shifts, loading and delivering bread to grocery stores. It was grueling, especially since I was the only woman and faced hostility from the men who doubted I could handle it. I mean, keep in mind, we're in like pretty rural New Hampshire. So one memorable day, I was delivering to a grocery store where a stunning, like immaculately made up, no nonsense woman managed the loading dock. The only woman receiver I knew of. The men respected her and she was tough, but friendly with them. And as I struggled with the bread racks, she approached me, her high heels, click, click, click on the floor. And she says, "This job is hard." And I agreed. I was already holding back tears. Like, look, the job, it really was very hard. And then she said, "It's too hard for you. You need to quit." Before she abruptly turned on her heel and walked away. I mean, and it's that initial feeling of relief when I saw her, thinking like, here's an ally. And, because I was already so emotionally like overloaded, and being like, oh, this is going to be great. And then just getting floored. So that day was one of the worst. I cried driving all the way back to the loading dock, feeling deflated. However, I will say her words ignited a determination in me. I was so close to quitting. The work was so hard, and to add insult to injury, I'm not a great driver, and I'd put a dent in the side of this nice new bread truck. So now I can't quit. There's a happy ending though. The route driver, who's this very kind man, he offered his daughter, he said, why don't you have your daughter ride with me? Because she typically rode with him. It was like kind of one of the ways they bonded, that she'd come along with him for this. So she knew the route and she knew kind of some of the ins and outs of being helpful. So this cheerful 15-year-old joined me for the remaining deliveries. Her help and company, they had transformed the experience. We sang Leanne Rhyme songs and had fun, making the job bearable. And the next time I saw that tough woman, I was laughing and enjoying my work, which was, the best possible outcome. And by the way, another story about child labor, Mary.
Yeah, I know. I'm taking notes, and there's like a theme.
What is it with me?
I mean, aside from your like Charles Dickens early childhood story, these stories are like really, they make me sad, right? Like I
Yeah.
feel, and I think that's the balance of this whole topic today in this episode of just, obviously, like yourself, I worked full time at college to go to school full time. And so we are people who have been working for a long time and we appreciate things. And these stories, particularly the betrayal of your boss, who felt the need to undermine you and publicly diminish your reputation behind your back, in particular, brings up a lot for me.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, it's not an uncommon occurrence and one I've shared. And I want to believe, and I do, because that's your story, is that like most of the people in the room saw her for what she is. And if she's talking shit behind your back, she's going to do that with others. And I think smart people notice this kind of thing, this type of character trait, even if they don't let in on it at the time. But I think what bothers me the most in particular is that she did this with a direct report, someone from her own team. This is where it feels like betrayal to me, and also like, her lack of any redeeming leadership qualities. And by the way, after we stop rolling, I want to hear where she is now. But then there's the positive side, right, which is the example of this board member who gives you the heads up. And I don't think this should be trivialized or minimized. And you kind of hinted to it, right? The cloak and dagger in the gardens, because from an organizational perspective, she broke hierarchical norms to protect you. And, maybe this can give us hope that there are allies out there, and we're lucky when they step in when we need them. And I guess the last thing would be I'm left pondering is whether your boss acted the way she did because you were highly competent and viewed as a threat, and or because you were a woman. If you had a male peer who was exceptional, would she have felt equally threatened? Would she have gone out of her way to try to discredit you? I think
I'll tell you, it was both.
Yeah.
And in this particular instance, one of the things that she was trying to do was take credit for my work as being a product of her contribution to the organization. So that was a big part of what that was about. But there was also some kind of internalized misogyny, I would say. I mean, without question. Yeah.
That's my personal experience, right? And that's why that's kind of the acorn of this that I want to call out, because I don't think we can fix what we don't kind of look at and kind of reflect on. And that is that being a woman was a meaningful variable in this equation. And I can't substantiate this belief, but I really do believe that this bias exists. And I think that it's something we all as women need to check within ourselves at different times throughout our career. Like, look, I get it. We talked about it. Women are battling a lot of obstacles. And I 100% understand why this brings out survival behaviors. And, yes, men, many are even outside of our conscious awareness. But Katie, I think we need to, like, this needs to be like a call to action for women, right? Like, this is all like, all right, let's support each other. Let's like look at our own feelings and biases, and like, let's fix this in ourselves so that we can fix this for other women and the next generation of workers. And imagine what we as women and empowered women in the workforce can do if we did just that. If we actually like linked arms and went like, hey, we're going to kind of like all support each other and look out for each other and do what's right.
Hey, fellow psychos, if you enjoyed the show, please click like, subscribe, and share it with other psychos you know. We'd also love to hear from you, so please hit us up on our socials. We're at Business Psychos Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.